Alright my friends, welcome to FISHTORY, and today we are going to look at something that most people don't even think about, and that is the North American discus, or the North American cichlid as I like to call them. And there's a number of fish that kind of meet this kind of model or archetype, and I think that the bluegill and the pumpkinseed fish, some of the other panfish as well, warmouths and green sunfish, also make a great archetype for this. But they are absolutely gorgeous, beautiful fish that can live in all sorts of different waters. And we're here today at a pond in the city of Seattle, and you can see there's lots of algae here. There's not much flow in the water, and it's early in the season, so this is a lot of algae for early in the season. But there are a lot of dragonfly nymphs, insects, all sorts of little flies and beetles and bugs and water striders and water skippers and oarsman beetles that are living in the water, as well as other small fish, tadpoles, newts, things like that. And these fish are found in these low oxygen level waters, and when they find an area like a nice still water but clear, not too muddy area, they will form these little circles, sand cleared out, or rocks or gravel cleared out of all the algae and debris, so that it makes a big bullseye for the females who may be swimming by from deeper water. Well, they will make a clearing, and let's go look at one right now just over here. They will make a little clearing, and the Lepomis gibbosus is right over here. Hopefully we'll even see some color on this one, and then I'll show you one out of the water. Yep, you can see the blue tail right there is guarding its nest. And when the water hits 56 degrees on the money, they will start spawning. And usually it needs to stay that warm for about a day. So stays that warm throughout the night, and they will lay their eggs, because 50 degrees or cooler and the eggs won't survive. So once it hits that temperature, that magical day in spring, usually around May or June here, they will start coloring up absolutely neon orange, blue, turquoise, and it kind of depends on the region and the subspecies or population. But here you can actually see the eye spot that makes them detectable, identifiable. Now they're only going to get 4 to 7 inches depending if it's female or male and how old it is, and by about 2 years old they're at their full maturity. Here you can already see the red on it, but we'll show you the blues and turquoise in just a moment. I've got one in a net waiting for you that was all colored up spawning, and this one here is waiting either to lay eggs, or rather have a female come by and lay eggs in his nest, or to have the eggs that are already possibly in the substrate here hatch. And he will protect them then, much like a cichlid, for anywhere between 2 to 3 days, sometimes as long as 4 if it's down in that 50 to 60 degree temperature range, but as quick as only 2 days if it's in the 70 degree range. The eggs will hatch, and this fish will then protect its young for an additional week to 2 weeks, and actually keep them in its mouth just like a cichlid, and protect those babies and kind of corral them and kind of get them to stay in the little nesting area that it's created where it can keep an eye on them. So we've got one right here in this net, and I've got some seaweed actually it's Alodia and some sort of parrot feather plant laid out so that it won't have too rough of a time when we lay it out, to get the contrast from the net. But they also have a really marvelous defense system, and that is in their fins. They have these sharp, bony, needle-like spikes in their dorsal fin. Now, by the way, you don't want to handle their body too much. Here you can see the spikes here. You don't want to handle their body too much, because you can impact their slime coat negatively. So if you grab them by the tail though, rather than the body, you won't get stabbed usually. But when they're in the water, they actually know how to navigate around, twist around, and stab you. Now, the other thing is they can live in extremely low oxygenated water that has almost no oxygen in it. And they can live out of water for a good 20 to 30 minutes oftentimes. So even though it's not the nicest thing to pull this fish out of water, today is still fairly cool. It's about 60 degrees. And this fish is on wet plants, so we could take a look at it for a minute or two. But again, the way to identify these differently than a bluegill is that ear spot that you look for. Let's try to get it back up here. Well, it wants to be in the net. Is this ear spot, and it being orange or crimson. And the way you can tell how much anthocyanins and carotenoids it's getting from both the vegetation and the insects that it's eating is by, if it's orange, it doesn't have a ton, and if it is deep red or blood red, crimson color, almost purple even, that means it's getting plenty of that in its diet. Now, people do keep these in aquaria, and they are a really territorial fish, just like a cichlid. Now, one just jumped right out there, and they will hold their own against largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, perch, and all sorts of other lake fish that are common to where they live. Now, they've been noted to be in the waters of North America since the first settlers came upon them from Europe, and of course the Native Americans before them. But they were not found all throughout North America. In fact, they were spread by early settlers and by people heading west, as well probably as the Native Americans, as a food source in watering holes that oftentimes would get really muddy and have very low oxygen. So they couldn't provide a good habitat for things like trout. So bass, bluegill, crappie, things like that could survive. And even more so than a bluegill, these guys can survive in low oxygen water. However, they can't survive in water that's too hot. That's where their weakness is. That's their chink in their armor, so to speak. But they do make a beautiful fish in aquaria if you set it up as a species tank or a biotope tank. And they do spawn throughout the year as long as the water is the right temperature. They can have up to 1,500 babies every time a female spawns, and she will sometimes go and spread 400 eggs here, 400 eggs there, and 400 eggs to another male. So she will take her time shopping around and looking for the best presenting male in a colony in a space like this, and then she will decide, okay, that's the one I want to pick. And she'll pick the biggest, healthiest, and most colorful one as her choice usually. Now you can see this one out here is just as colorful as the other one, but those yellows and reds are not quite as visible yet on this guy here, except for on the ear or that black dot. Now that black dot is there so that they look like a big predatory fish underwater to other fish. So it doesn't protect them so much from things like cranes or eagles or ospreys that are present in this habitat of Western Washington where I live, but it does protect them from larger fish like a largemouth bass or even like a salmon or something like that if they're out in the open waters, because that eye spot tricks fish into thinking that that black dot is the pupil, and however big that pupil is, the rest of the fish is going to be to scale of that size. So you can see how that would trick a predator. Now this one has a relatively small eye spot still and large stripes, so we know this one's still growing, and it's going to grow to be a relatively large fish. Now it's losing some of the color, so we want to be sure to get it back into the water, even though it is in the water, but we want to be sure to get it back and have it happy. You don't want it to feel too stressed out. We've tortured the poor guy enough, but I just had to show you guys what a beautiful fish this is up close and personal, and maybe think about keeping them if you have an unheated or cool water aquarium. As I said, they are basically as colorful as a discus, and people do hybridize them with other sunfish, other Lepomis genus sunfish, warmouth, green sunfish, yellow sunfish. You've got all sorts of different mixed hybrids, long-eared sunfish and red belly sunfish. You know, people call them different things all over the country as their common names, but any of the common panfish pretty much are interchangeable genetically, and they do hybridize and make for quite beautiful fish, because a lot of times the bluegills have a purple and green that's brought into the mix, and that belly that's orange here will have purple and green as a transitional zone when they hybridize. And they'll also usually retain that crescent by the ear spot or eye spot on their side. So I hope you guys think this is as cool of a native fish as I do. The only difficult part about keeping them in captivity is that feeding them live food is ideal. Obviously, they like a planted tank with lots of places to hide and lots of places to graze. And spawning them in captivity is a bit of a challenge because you've got all those babies to feed. But they will readily spawn in captivity if you've got, say, a 55-gallon or larger. They're not going to get much bigger than about 1 pound or half a kilo at the max, and it makes for a really interesting fish, especially for ponds, to keep insects at bay as well. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. I can't do it without you guys. And if you like these native fish that I love showing off how colorful and beautiful they can be, let me know if you want to see more native fish stuff, or if you guys like the exotic and tropical stuff. Let me know in the comments. It's always helpful to kind of gauge which way to go. But I can't do this without you guys, and channel members, as well as super chatters and people who buy merch, and people, I mean, everybody who's even just watching the videos. I can't do this without you, and you guys are the reason I can do this. So thank you so very kindly for your time, energy, and engagement, and I will see you guys next time.